Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world that, at first glance, seems strangely familiar. Picture it. Gas lamps flickering against rain-slicked cobblestones, the distant clang of horse-drawn carriages, and the pervasive scent of coal smoke mingling with damp earth. You're in Victorian England, or perhaps the bustling streets of burgeoning American cities, a place of stern moralizing, rapid industrial change, and an almost suffocating sense of propriety. But beneath that polished veneer, a different current is flowing, a whisper from beyond the veil. This wasn't just a time of top hats and corsets. It was a time when millions believed, with unwavering conviction, that the dead were not truly gone, but merely on another side, waiting to communicate. And they found ways to listen. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop your current location and local time in the comments. It's always wild to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a dimly lit Victorian parlor, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the gaslight glow outside. The air is thick with the scent of old wood, dust, and perhaps a faint, sweet floral perfume. A hushed anticipation fills the room, broken only by the gentle tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the hall and the occasional soft cough from one of the half-dozen people gathered around a polished mahogany table. This isn't a card game or a literary salon. This is a séance. And you, my friend, are right in the thick of it, a silent observer to one of the most pervasive, influential, and utterly bizarre cultural phenomena of the Victorian-era spiritualism. And honestly, given how often these things involve dark rooms and unseen hands, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes here without tripping over a very expensive potted fern. The sheer volume of material produced by these famous adherents, books, lectures, scientific papers, personal letters, painted a picture of a phenomenon that was being rigorously examined and, to their minds, proven. This created a powerful counter-narrative to the skeptics, suggesting that it was the closed-minded and prejudiced who refused to acknowledge the new truths being revealed by the spirit world. The mid-19th century was a curious cocktail of contradictions. On one hand, you had the relentless march of scientific discovery. Darwin was theorizing evolution, electricity was being harnessed, photography was capturing fleeting moments. The material world was yielding its secrets at an astonishing pace. On the other hand, traditional religious beliefs were being challenged, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, and perhaps most significantly, the era was gripped by an almost unimaginable amount of grief. This is one of the most common historical facts often cited as a key driver for spiritualism's popularity, the high mortality rates of the Victorian age, especially among children, and the devastating impact of wars like the American Civil War. You hear a faint rustle of silk and the soft clinking of teacups, as if a spectral social gathering is underway. The air is thick not just with the scent of fine tea, but with the weighty presence of intellectual debate and profound conviction. The Victorians, in their quest for understanding, turned to the spirit world not out of ignorance, but often out of a thirst for knowledge that went beyond the material. Imagine living in a time when infectious diseases like cholera, tuberculosis, and diphtheria swept through communities with terrifying speed. Infant mortality was tragically common, and medical science, though advancing, was still primitive by modern standards. Death was an ever-present companion, a constant shadow in every home. Funerals were frequent, and mourning was a rigid, elaborate social ritual, often lasting for years, especially for widows who wore black for extended periods. There was no social media to post tributes, no grief counseling, just the stark, unyielding reality of loss. So, when people promised a direct line to your departed loved ones, a way to know they were okay, to get one last message, it was a lifeline to a drowning heart. It was like offering a desperate person a Wi-Fi signal in the middle of the ocean. They'd jump at it. No questions asked. Their fascination was not a sign of simple credulity, but of a deep engagement with the big questions of existence. What is consciousness? Does it survive death? Is there more to the universe than what our five senses perceive? Spiritualism offered tantalizing, seemingly direct answers to these ancient queries, even if those answers often came with the caveat of darkened rooms and mysterious raps. Into this crucible of scientific progress and profound personal sorrow stepped spiritualism. It wasn't entirely new. Ideas about communicating with the dead had existed for centuries in various forms. But what made Victorian spiritualism unique was its claim to be a science. It wasn't magic, not superstition, but a demonstrable, repeatable phenomenon. A new form of communication with unseen forces, provable through empirical observation. This appeal to scientific rationalism, even if it was pseudoscientific, resonated deeply with the public grappling with both doubt and discovery. It was marketed as a new frontier of knowledge, a logical extension of understanding the natural world. Except the natural world now included disembodied spirits. As the light in this grand parlor seems to dim, a sense of quiet reflection descends. The stories of these prominent spiritualists remind you that belief, especially when intertwined with hope and loss, can be a powerful force, capable of swaying even the most scientific minds. The Victorians, from their highest echelons to their humblest homes, were truly haunted, not just by the idea of ghosts, but by the relentless pursuit of meaning in a world that was rapidly changing, and a universe that still held so many secrets. The belief system was deceptively simple. The spirits of the dead continued to exist in a spirit world, and they could communicate with the living. This communication was facilitated by individuals with special abilities called mediums. These mediums served as conduits, bridging the gap between the physical and spiritual realms. The grand drawing rooms and scientific laboratories, once filled with the eager intellectual curiosity of prominent spiritualists, now begin to shift. The gaslight dims slightly, not for a séance, but to illuminate a different stage, the arena where belief clashed with skepticism, and where the curtain was relentlessly pulled back on trickery. You're about to witness the other side of the Victorian coin. The rise of those who were utterly convinced that the whispers from beyond were nothing more than elaborate deceptions, and they dedicated their lives to proving it. You lean forward slightly, trying to catch every detail in the gloom. The medium, a pale woman in a dark dress, sits opposite you, her eyes closed, breathing shallowly. The rest of the participants, mostly middle-aged men and women dressed in their finest, sit with hands joined atop the table, forming a psychic circuit. The room is so quiet you can hear the gas jets hissing softly. This quiet, hushed atmosphere, the sense of intense focus, was crucial for these early séances. You find yourself in a lecture hall, the air buzzing with a different kind of energy. It's not hushed reverence, but a charged atmosphere of challenge and exposé. On a stage, not a medium, but a figure of sharp intellect and often dazzling showmanship, stands ready to reveal secrets. This isn't about connecting with the dead, it's about dissecting the living. This is where the magic, both real and manufactured, of the Victorian era collided, and often the spirits lost. The forms of communication were varied and often dramatic. The most famous and, of course, obvious was spirit rapping, an auditory phenomenon where mysterious knocks and taps would emanate from walls, furniture, or the air itself, often in response to questions. One tap for yes, two for no, or complex codes for spelling out messages. Then there was table tipping, where the table itself would rock, lift, or even levitate, seemingly propelled by unseen hands. Imagine the furniture in your house suddenly getting very opinionated about your life choices. It's a lot less charming when it's your great Aunt Mildred's spirit trying to tell you to finally get married. One of the most common historical facts related to this period is the increasing professionalization of skepticism and the public exposure of fraudulent mediums. As spiritualism gained immense popularity and mediums began charging significant fees for their services, the stakes grew higher. The more money and fame involved, the greater the incentive for deception, and the more compelling the need for those who believed in scientific rigor and rational inquiry to step forward and challenge the claims. It became a public spectacle, a grand intellectual circus where mediums performed feats and debunkers performed counterfeits. It was like a very serious, very public game of whack-a-mole, but the moles were ghosts. Later, more elaborate phenomena emerged: automatic writing, where the medium's hand would write messages involuntarily, trance speaking, where a spirit would supposedly speak directly through the medium's vocal cords, materialization, where ethereal forms, often misty and fleeting, would appear, sometimes even allowing physical contact, and spirit photography, where ghostly figures would appear in photographs alongside the living. Each new phenomenon fueled the excitement and the belief that the barriers between worlds were truly falling. The methods of exposure were varied, often ingenious, and sometimes quite theatrical themselves. Many of the most effective debunkers were professional stage magicians, who understood the art of illusion better than anyone. They knew how to create impressive effects with sleight of hand, hidden wires, trapdoors, and clever misdirection. To them, the miracles of the séance room were simply variations of tricks they performed for entertainment every night. When a medium claimed a spirit bell was ringing in midair, a magician could often produce the same effect by secretly holding a small bell in their mouth, or between their toes. When a table levitated, a magician knew about unseen levers or strategically placed accomplices. Now, let's talk about a truly unique and often little-known detail that helped pave the way for spiritualism the earlier: widespread fascination with mesmerism, also known as animal magnetism. Developed by Franz Mesmer in the late 18th century, mesmerism proposed that a universal fluid flowed between people and objects, and that a trained practitioner could manipulate this fluid to heal or to induce altered states of consciousness, like a trance. By the time spiritualism emerged, mesmerism had already popularized the idea of unseen forces, psychic influence, and altered mental states. People were already familiar with the concept of a person being put into a magnetic trance and communicating things they couldn't possibly know in a normal state. Imagine sitting in a public demonstration. A medium might boast about their ability to materialize spirit hands from a cabinet. Then a magician steps forward, enters a similar cabinet, and with a flourish produces two spirit hands, his own hands, deftly manipulated through a secret opening, perhaps disguised with a bit of cheesecloth. The crowd gasps, not at the spirit, but at the sheer audacity and cleverness of the human trickery. It was both devastating for believers and wildly entertaining for the skeptics. It was like watching a magic show, then going backstage and seeing all the wires and mirrors. Poof, the mystery is gone. Imagine a parlor trick, or a healing session, where a mesmerist passes over a patient could put them into a deep sleep, and perhaps in that state, they would speak profound truths or diagnose ailments. This wasn't seen as supernatural in the same way, but as a scientific manipulation of natural forces. This pre-existing acceptance of the magnetic fluid and induced trances created a fertile intellectual and cultural soil for the idea of mediums channeling spirits. It made the leap from magnetic trance to spirit trance seem less like a leap of faith and more like a logical progression. People were already primed to believe in the hidden powers of the mind and the body. It was like setting up all the dominoes perfectly before the first one even fell. Fraudulent mediums employed a wide array of tricks. Spirit rapping could be produced by cracking toe joints, snapping fingers, or using hidden mechanisms under the table that created tapping sounds. Table tipping was often achieved by subtly pressing knees or feet against the table legs, or by using a hidden lever operated by the medium. Automatic writing might involve the medium secretly writing messages on a slate with their free hand, or using a nail writer, a small pencil lead affixed to a finger, to write under the table. Materializations were frequently performed using white-draped confederates who posed as spirits, or by the medium themselves, disguised in flowing white robes. Ectoplasm, as you might remember, was often faked using cotton wool, gauze, egg whites, or even chewed-up paper, sometimes regurgitated by the medium. It was a messy, often disgusting business, proving that some spirits preferred to communicate via stomach contents. As the medium shivers slightly, a faint creak comes from the ceiling. Then another, louder rap. A thrill runs through the room. Someone whispers, "Is that you? Dear departed Eleanor?" The rapping continues, seemingly responding with a single clear knock. A sob escapes from one of the women at the table. For a moment, you almost feel it too. A chill independent of the draft from the window. Perhaps the most famous and relentless debunker of his age was Harry Houdini, 1874 to 1926. The legendary escape artist and magician. His journey into debunking spiritualism was a deeply personal one. Initially, after the death of his beloved mother, he desperately hoped to contact her through mediums. However, every medium he consulted either failed to provide convincing evidence or was quickly exposed as a fraud. This personal disappointment, combined with his unparalleled understanding of illusion and deception, turned him into spiritualism's most vocal and formidable opponent. The appeal of spiritualism was multifaceted. For the bereaved, it offered profound comfort, the promise that death was not the end, that loved ones were still present, still aware, still capable of offering guidance or solace. For others, it was pure entertainment, a thrilling parlor game that offered a glimpse into the mysterious, a break from the rigid decorum of Victorian life. It was a social event, a chance to gather with like-minded individuals and discuss the profound mysteries of existence. For many women, it provided a unique avenue for power and influence in a society that often limited their roles. Female mediums, like the Fox sisters themselves, became celebrities, entrepreneurs, and spiritual leaders, wielding influence that would have been unimaginable in other professions. It was like a proto-influencer culture, but with more ectoplasm and fewer sponsored posts. Houdini dedicated the last years of his life to a crusade against fraudulent mediums. He attended séances disguised as a regular sitter, meticulously observed the medium's methods, and then publicly exposed their tricks, often by replicating the very phenomena he had just witnessed. He even offered a substantial cash reward to any medium who could produce genuine psychic phenomena under truly controlled conditions, a reward that was never claimed. His lectures were wildly popular, and he published books and articles detailing the mechanics of fraud. He became a one-man wrecking crew against the paranormal, proving that sometimes the greatest magic is just very clever trickery. It's like discovering your favorite superhero is actually just a very athletic person with a really good costume. Still impressive, but in a different way. But amidst all this earnest belief and dramatic communication, a crucial question always loomed. Often unspoken, sometimes shouted by skeptics, was it real? This leads us to a fascinating and ongoing point of academic debate. Historians still debate whether the widespread embrace of spiritualism in the Victorian era was primarily a genuine spiritual awakening, fueled by immense societal grief, or a subconscious rebellion against the strictures of Victorian morality and rigid religious orthodoxy. Was it truly about connecting with the dead? Or was it also about finding an escape from a society that demanded strict emotional control, stifled genuine expression, and offered few outlets for individual agency? Especially for women, you feel a flicker of admiration for Houdini's tenacity. He was willing to risk his immense popularity, and even his life, as many mediums and their enraged followers threatened him to expose what he saw as a cruel exploitation of human grief. His focus was always on the deliberate deceivers, not necessarily on the genuine believers, whom he often viewed as victims. Some argue that the sheer number of sincere believers, the profound comfort it offered, and the earnestness with which many sought genuine connection speaks to a deep spiritual need that traditional institutions were failing to meet. Others suggest that the dark parlors and the mysterious phenomena offered a safe space for Victorians to explore taboo subjects: death, sexuality, rebellion against authority, under the guise of spiritual inquiry. The mediums, often women, could exercise a form of power and engage in behaviors like going into a trance or experiencing physical manifestations that would be considered unseemly or even hysterical in other contexts. It was a loophole, a socially sanctioned way to let loose, even if only for an hour. It's like when you pretend to be really interested in gardening so you can avoid doing dishes. It's got a purpose beyond the surface. Another key player in the skeptical movement was the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, founded in London in 1882. While the SPR's initial aim was a broad, scientific investigation of psychic phenomena, and it included many individuals who hoped to prove spiritualism, a significant portion of its work involved exposing fraud. Unlike Houdini's public showmanship, the SPR adopted a more academic and methodical approach. They conducted controlled experiments, meticulously documented séance conditions, and published their findings in scholarly journals. They investigated claims of telepathy, clairvoyance, and apparitions, but their most impactful work often involved the systematic debunking of mediums who couldn't stand up to rigorous scrutiny. They weren't just saying it's fake, they were saying here's how they did it, and here's the scientific evidence. The very atmosphere of the Victorian era, with its gaslit streets, fog-laden alleys, and Gothic sensibilities, lent itself perfectly to the mystical. Ghost stories were popular. Séances provided a chilling form of entertainment, and the line between the natural and supernatural was constantly blurred in popular imagination. Technology itself played a strange role. The telegraph, which allowed instant communication across vast distances, made the idea of communication across the ultimate divide, death, seem less absurd. If wires could carry voices, why couldn't spirits carry messages? It was the original, there's an app for that. But the app was a human medium, and the network was, well, nebulous. And now, for a truly unique and often little-known detail about the methods employed by those who opposed spiritualism, some serious skeptics and investigators created highly elaborate, often secret, countermeasures and detection methods to unmask mediums, going far beyond simple observation. This wasn't just about watching, it was about laying traps. The medium stirs, a low moan escaping her lips. The table gives a sudden, violent shudder, making you jump. A porcelain teacup on a nearby side table rattles precariously. Someone gasps. What is it? Dear spirit? The room is cold now, a palpable drop in temperature that makes the hairs on your arms stand on end. You wonder if it's just the draft, or something else entirely. The Victorians were constantly wrestling with this question, caught between a rational, scientific worldview and an overwhelming desire to believe in something more. Something that could transcend the grim finality of death. For instance, some investigators would covertly mark objects in the seance room with invisible phosphorescent powder that would transfer to the medium's hands if they touched them in the dark. Later, under ultraviolet light, these telltale marks would glow, revealing the medium's physical contact with spirit objects. Other methods included having sitters subtly sew a thread to the medium's clothes to detect movement from inside a cabinet, or even placing secretly coated carbon paper under the medium's chair to record impressions if they stood up. Perhaps the most intriguing was the discovery of spirit masks and costumes hidden in mediums' cabinets, proving that materialized spirits were often nothing more than a medium's confederate, or the medium themselves, wearing a cheap disguise. It's like finding the entire Halloween costume department in your magician's hat. Suddenly, the disappearing rabbit makes a lot more sense. They sought proof, desperately. Many prominent scientists and intellectuals, including Alfred Russel Wallace, co-discoverer of evolution, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, became staunch believers, convinced by what they saw at séances. For them, spiritualism wasn't blind faith, it was an observable phenomenon, an extension of natural law yet to be fully understood. This intellectual endorsement further fueled its respectability, drawing in more adherents from all social strata, from grieving queens to factory workers. It was a truly democratic movement, accessible to anyone with a few shillings and a desire to connect. Imagine the thrill of a debunker applying a special chemical to a seemingly empty hand, only to reveal the faint glow of phosphorescent powder where a spirit had touched a sitter's cheek. These were the moments of triumph for the skeptics, moments where the invisible forces of the spirit world were suddenly rendered visible as mundane, often tawdry, human deception. These hidden detection methods were the Victorian equivalent of forensic science, applied to the supernatural. The legacy of this era, the lingering questions it posed about life, death, and consciousness, still resonate today. The Victorians, haunted by grief and tantalized by the unseen, threw open the doors to a world beyond, a world they believed held the answers to their deepest fears and their most fervent hopes. You can still feel the lingering chill, the faint whisper of what might have been, or what they truly believed to be. The table settles, and the medium slowly opens her eyes, looking utterly drained. The séance is over for now. But the questions it raised, the yearning it fed, lingered long after the gaslights were extinguished. And this brings us to a fascinating and still debated point of academic discussion. Historians still debate whether the relentless efforts of skeptics and debunkers primarily undermined the core belief in spiritualism, leading to its eventual decline in mainstream popularity. or if they merely forced it underground and into more private, less public forms, ultimately transforming rather than eradicating the movement. Did the exposés truly destroy people's faith? Or did they simply make believers more cautious and discreet? The lingering scent of dusty velvet and the faint, almost imperceptible echo of the last séance still hang in the air around you. You've witnessed the raw yearning of the Victorians for connection, the fertile ground of grief and curiosity that was ripe for something new. Now, let's peel back the layers to the precise moment this widespread phenomenon truly began. Not in a grand London salon, but in a humble, rather ordinary farmhouse in rural New York. We're going back to the very first tap, the one that supposedly opened the floodgates between worlds, and launched 1 million tables into an ethereal dance. Some scholars argue that the accumulation of countless fraud exposures, particularly by figures as prominent as Houdini, undeniably eroded public trust and made it increasingly difficult for spiritualism to maintain its veneer of scientific legitimacy. The repeated revelations that spirits were just humans with clever tricks led to widespread cynicism and ridicule, pushing spiritualism to the fringes of society. Others contend that while public séances dwindled, private practice and sincere belief persisted, simply adapting to the new reality. They suggest that true believers, often driven by profound grief, were largely unaffected by exposures, viewing them as isolated incidents or the work of malicious forces. For them, faith remained paramount, and the demand for spiritual connection simply shifted to more intimate, less theatrical settings. It's like trying to get rid of a persistent weed. You might cut it back, but the roots often remain, ready to sprout again when conditions are right. You find yourself transported to Hydesville to New York in March of 1848. The air here is crisp, rural, carrying the scent of damp earth and spring growth, a stark contrast to the stifling parlors of the city. You're not in a gloomy, gaslit room anymore, but a simple, drafty farmhouse. The walls are thin, the floorboards creak, and the nights are long and quiet, disturbed only by the sounds of the countryside. This is the home of the Fox family, Mother Margaret, Father John, and their 2 youngest daughters, Margaretta Maggie, aged 14, and Kate, just 11. They are, by all accounts, an unassuming, respectable family. Certainly not the type you'd expect to accidentally kickstart a global movement. You almost feel like you're intruding, like you've walked into a very quiet, very normal family dinner, just before everything goes completely sideways. The skepticism wasn't just external, it sometimes came from within the spiritualist community itself, as some sincere mediums also spoke out against the fraudulent practices of their peers, fearing that widespread deception would discredit the entire movement. This internal conflict further complicated the narrative, making it harder for the public to discern genuine belief from calculated fraud. The story, as it's told, begins with mysterious noises. For several nights, the Fox family had been disturbed by inexplicable raps and knocks emanating from the walls, the floor, the furniture. At first, they dismissed it as rats, or perhaps the wind playing tricks in the old house. But the noises grew more persistent, more distinct, and frankly, a bit too rhythmic for your average rodent infestation. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep when your house sounds like it's hosting a tiny, invisible tap dancing convention. You can almost hear the triumphant applause as a debunker reveals a hidden wire or a false bottom. The air, once thick with ethereal anticipation, now rings with the satisfaction of rational explanation. The Victorians were constantly caught between the profound desire to believe in something beyond their grasp and the equally powerful impulse to understand and control their world through reason and logic. The debunkers represented the latter, standing as guardians against credulity and exploitation. Then, on the night of March 31st, 1848, little Kate Fox, with the fearless curiosity only an 11-year-old possesses, decided to challenge the unseen noisemaker. "Here, Mr. Splitfoot, do as I do," she reportedly chirped, clapping her hands, and instantly, a responding clap, a sharp, distinct rap, echoed back from within the walls. This was the moment that changed everything. It wasn't random, it was responsive. It wasn't just noise, it was communication. Their efforts, while often successful in exposing specific frauds, highlight the enduring power of belief, especially when intertwined with hope and emotional vulnerability. For every expose, there was often another medium, another parlor, and new believers eager to bridge the divide. The battle between belief and skepticism, between the seen and the unseen, raged throughout the Victorian era, leaving a complex legacy that continues to fascinate and confound us. The ghosts of the Victorians, it seems, were not easily laid to rest. The era's famous spiritualist periodicals, such as Light and the Spiritualist, published articles by these prominent figures, detailing their investigations and beliefs. This gave the movement an academic veneer and made it seem like a legitimate intellectual pursuit, not just a fringe belief. It was crucial for attracting new adherents from the educated classes and for maintaining the faith of existing ones. The applause for the debunkers and the satisfying clink of phosphorescent powder fades into the background as you shift once more. The lecture hall, with its clear-cut demonstrations of trickery, gives way to a more formal, almost sterile environment, the scientific laboratory. This isn't about showmanship or public expose now. It's about control, measurement, and the painstaking pursuit of truth. You're about to witness the Victorian era's most earnest, and often most frustrated, attempts to bring the enigmatic world of spirits under the unforgiving microscope of science. Maggie, her older sister, quickly stepped in, proposing a code. "If you are a spirit, rap twice," she might have said. 2 clear raps followed. "Are you a human?" No response. "Are you a spirit?" 2 raps. The family then proceeded to ask yes, no questions, eventually working out a system for spelling out names and messages. The spirit claimed to be that of Charles B. Rosna, a peddler who had been murdered in the house 5 years prior and buried in the cellar. This dramatic revelation, whether true or fabricated, immediately added a chilling narrative depth to the mysterious raps. You find yourself standing amidst an array of curious contraptions, delicate scales, sensitive thermometers, custom-built electrical circuits, and various recording devices. The air here is cleaner, tinged with the faint scent of chemicals and polished brass. Men in tweed jackets and women with serious expressions pore over notebooks filled with meticulous observations. This isn't a séance designed to impress, it's an experiment designed to prove or disprove. And let me tell you, trying to scientifically measure a ghost is harder than trying to nail jelly to a tree while wearing boxing gloves. This communication, initially just a family secret, quickly spilled out. Neighbors were invited, skeptical at first, then astonished. The news spread like wildfire through the small community and beyond, carried by word of mouth and then by local newspapers. This immediate, palpable connection to something beyond, something that could provide direct answers from the deceased, was electrifying. It offered a tangible, almost scientific, validation for something humanity had always yearned for proof of an afterlife. This instant, direct communication with alleged spirits is the most common historical fact associated with the origins of spiritualism. Directly linked to the Fox sisters and their spirit rappings, it was revolutionary because it democratized interaction with the supernatural. You didn't need a priest or a church, just a medium and a responsive entity. One of the most common historical facts related to this phase of spiritualism is the formal establishment of organizations dedicated to the scientific investigation of psychic phenomena, most notably the Society for Psychical Research, SPR. Founded in London in 1882, the SPR brought together a remarkable roster of distinguished academics, scientists, philosophers, and politicians. Unlike previous, more informal investigations or the outright debunking efforts of magicians, the SPR aimed for a systematic, dispassionate, and truly scientific approach to studying everything from telepathy and clairvoyance to apparitions and, of course, the physical phenomena of spiritualist séances. As you stand there in the Fox farmhouse, listening to the echoes of those original raps, you realize the sheer simplicity of it. No elaborate rituals, no arcane incantations, just a challenge and a response. This accessibility was key to its rapid spread. Anyone could try it, or at least believe they could. It tapped into that deep well of Victorian grief, offering a direct personal channel to the departed. Imagine losing a child, spouse, a sibling, and then suddenly being told there's a way to know they're still there, still conscious, still loving you. It was an irresistible balm for aching hearts. For many, It felt like the answer to every prayer, a direct line to heaven. Bypassing the often austere pronouncements of traditional churches, imagine a group of highly respected individuals, including former prime ministers, Cambridge scholars, and leading physicists, sitting down and seriously debating whether a table levitated due to spirit power or clever legwork. Their goal was not to promote spiritualism, but to determine whether any of the claims held up under rigorous scrutiny. They meticulously documented cases, collected witness testimonies, and conducted controlled experiments with mediums. This institutionalized approach lent a significant air of academic credibility to the study of the paranormal, even if their findings often remained inconclusive or led to more questions than answers. It was the Victorian equivalent of setting up a government committee to investigate Bigfoot sightings, except with more formal attire and less actual Bigfoot. The Fox sisters quickly became sensations. They started holding public demonstrations, first in Rochester, then in bigger cities like New York. The raps followed them. Rooms would vibrate, tables would lift, and messages would be spelled out by unseen forces. They didn't just rap, they developed increasingly complex methods of communication. Their performances were often held in dim lighting, with an atmosphere of solemnity and reverence. People flocked to them, desperate for contact with their own lost loved ones, or simply curious to witness what seemed to be a miracle. The sisters, still teenagers, found themselves at the center of a burgeoning religious and social movement. It was like becoming a pop star overnight. But your hit single was a series of knocks from beyond the grave, and your tour manager was a ghost. These investigations were driven by genuine scientific curiosity and a desire to understand the seemingly inexplicable. The Victorians lived in a world where new forces and phenomena were constantly being discovered. Electromagnetism, X-rays, radioactivity. If these invisible forces could be harnessed and understood, why not the forces behind psychic phenomena? To many, psychical research was simply an extension of natural philosophy, pushing the boundaries of what was known. They believed that if genuine psychic abilities existed, they must operate according to some as yet undiscovered laws of nature. Now, for a truly unique and often little-known detail about the Fox sisters, long before their public confessions of fraud, which we'll get to later. Don't worry. The sisters, particularly Maggie, developed an uncanny ability to control the exact location and intensity of the raps, making them appear to come from under the floorboards, inside walls, or even on a participant's own head. This precision was initially seen as undeniable proof of spiritual agency. Maggie, in particular, became adept at this, developing a subtle technique of cracking her toe joints or knee joints against furniture or the floorboards. She even claimed in her later confession that they could make the raps seem to come from different heights and distances. The early SPR investigations into mediums involved highly detailed protocols. Sitters might be searched for hidden devices. Mediums were often physically restrained, sometimes even tied up to prevent them from manipulating objects. And séances were conducted in laboratories with scientific instruments present. They hoped to detect subtle changes in temperature, weight, or electromagnetic fields that might indicate the presence of a spirit force. They sometimes used sealed containers to hold objects the medium was supposed to influence, or employed cameras to capture any physical manifestations. It was a Herculean effort to bring the fleeting and intangible into the realm of the measurable. Imagine the skill required to produce raps that were not just consistent, but also seemingly intelligent and precisely located. This wasn't merely a random noise generator. It was a highly refined, performative skill that mimicked genuine paranormal activity with astonishing accuracy. This specific, almost acrobatic control over their physical bodies to produce the sounds demonstrates a level of deceptive artistry that went far beyond simple trickery. It was like a master illusionist performing sleight of hand, but instead of cards, it was disembodied spirits. This unique detail underscores not just their later admissions, but the sheer ingenuity involved in the early days of their spiritual career. Now, for a truly unique and often little-known detail about these scientific investigations, some SPR researchers even attempted to quantify the psychic force that mediums supposedly emitted, sometimes using incredibly sensitive, custom-built instruments that were, ironically, often so delicate they were susceptible to the slightest vibration or air current. And this brings us to a fascinating and still debated point of academic discussion. Historians still debate the extent to which the Fox sisters initially intended to create a fraudulent spiritual movement versus stumbling into it accidentally and then being swept up by its rapid growth and the fervent belief of their followers. Was it a deliberate deception from day one, conceived by mischievous children? Or did they genuinely believe they were interacting with something at first, only later resorting to trickery when under pressure to produce results? Imagine a device called a sthenometer, designed to measure tiny deflections caused by an unseen psychic force, or a pneumatic balance so finely tuned it could register the weight of an apparition. These researchers were building bespoke contraptions, sometimes in their own homes, hoping to catch a measurable flicker of the paranormal. They would calibrate these devices with extreme precision, only to have them respond to a sneeze, a passing carriage, or the medium's own subtle breathing. It's like trying to weigh a feather with a scale designed for elephants, and then getting confused when a gust of wind sends the needle spinning. Some scholars argue that it began as a childish prank that escalated beyond their control. The initial raps might have been innocent, perhaps even unconscious, but the immediate, overwhelming validation from adults desperate for comfort quickly taught the girls that they held a unique power. They were young, impressionable, and suddenly thrust into the limelight. Others suggest that the precise, responsive nature of the initial raps, even if produced by cracking joints, indicates a more deliberate, albeit nascent, attempt at deception from the outset. The murdered peddler story, too, feels a bit too convenient and dramatic to be a purely accidental phenomenon. It's like trying to figure out if your friend's tall tale started as a slip of the tongue or a carefully constructed narrative for attention. The truth is probably somewhere in the murky middle, evolving as the stakes grew higher. These attempts highlight both the earnestness of their scientific endeavor and the inherent difficulty of applying conventional scientific methods to phenomena that, if real, might operate outside those conventions. The sheer ingenuity in devising these instruments speaks volumes about their commitment, even if the results were often ambiguous at best, or definitively fraudulent at worst. They were pioneering a new field, but they were doing so with limited tools and an almost boundless optimism about what science could achieve. The spiritualist movement quickly diversified beyond simple raps. Other mediums emerged, claiming different abilities. Soon, you had mediums who could produce automatic writing, their hands seemingly guided by unseen forces to scribble messages from the dead, often in flowing, archaic script. Imagine a pen suddenly taking on a life of its own, scratching out messages from your long-lost grandmother, possibly telling you to wear warmer socks. And this brings us to a fascinating and still debated point of academic discussion. Historians still debate whether the scientific investigation of spiritualism by organizations like the SPR ultimately validated the existence of some genuinely anomalous phenomena, even if not strictly spirits. Or if the repeated failures to find conclusive, repeatable evidence under controlled conditions ultimately proved the non-existence of such phenomena, thus serving to eventually marginalize spiritualism within mainstream scientific discourse. Did their efforts open a door, or did they definitively close it? Then there was trance speaking, where the medium would fall into a deep trance, and a different voice, purportedly that of a spirit, would emerge from their lips. These spirit controls often had distinct personalities, names, and even accents, serving as the medium's personal ghostly assistant. They might offer advice, philosophical insights, or simply mundane messages from departed loved ones. This added a whole new layer of theatricality and intimacy to the séances. Some scholars argue that while outright fraud was certainly prevalent, the SPR's rigorous documentation of certain puzzling cases, where no conventional explanation could be found even after exhaustive investigation, suggests that there might have been some genuine, albeit rare and elusive, phenomena at play, perhaps telepathy or clairvoyance, if not full-blown spirit communication. They point to the fact that some SPR members remained convinced of something beyond the ordinary. Others contend that the vast majority of puzzling cases were eventually explained by more sophisticated understanding of psychology, trickery, or observational errors. They argue that the inability to produce repeatable results under controlled conditions, despite decades of effort by some of the brightest minds, served as the ultimate scientific verdict against spiritualism's claims, gradually pushing it into the realm of pseudoscience. It's like trying to prove perpetual motion No matter how many clever designs you come up with, the laws of physics eventually have the final say. As the movement gained traction, it attracted a diverse array of followers. Grieving parents, wealthy industrialists, intellectuals, abolitionists, and suffragists all found something compelling within spiritualism. For the bereaved, it offered solace. For social reformers, it provided a new platform. Many spirits reportedly communicated messages of equality and justice, making spiritualism a surprisingly progressive force in certain social movements of the time, particularly for women's rights and the abolition of slavery. It was a strange bedfellow, combining ethereal messages with very real earthly activism. You observe one of the SPR's actual experiments. A medium is seated in a specially designed cabinet meant to prevent movement. Delicate threads, connected to recording devices, are strung across the opening. The lights are dimmed but not fully out, allowing observers to see. The medium goes into a trance. A faint rap is heard. A researcher meticulously notes it down. Another rap. A slight tremor on a pressure plate. The needle on a dial jumps. For a moment, it feels like they're on the verge of a breakthrough, a quantifiable link to the unknown. Then, a creak of wood, and the threads momentarily snagged. Was it the medium or the spirit? The ambiguity, the tantalizing uncertainty, was often the SPR's greatest challenge and its most enduring legacy. The demand for séances and private consultations with mediums exploded. Mediums became celebrities, traveling across the country and even internationally, charging fees for their services. This burgeoning industry, however, also attracted charlatans and outright frauds. The dark parlors and the desperation of the bereaved provided ample opportunity for trickery. Clever mediums learned to use simple stage magic, sliding tables with their feet, making noises with concealed devices, using confederates, or even faking ectoplasm with cheesecloth and egg whites. It was like the Wild West of paranormal entertainment, where quality control was practically non-existent. The scientific skepticism wasn't always gentle. While the SPR aimed for objectivity, individual scientists often expressed their frustration, or outright contempt, for what they perceived as credulity and fraud. Figures like Michael Faraday, the renowned chemist and physicist, conducted early investigations into table turning in the 1850s, conclusively demonstrating that the movements were caused by unconscious muscular action by the sitters known as the ideomotor effect, rather than spirits. He published his findings widely, dampening some of the initial enthusiasm. His clear, concise explanations offered a rational alternative to supernatural claims. The societal impact was profound. Spiritualism challenged orthodox religion, arguing that its proof of an afterlife was more direct and scientifically verifiable than traditional faith. It also offered a unique space for women, who comprised the vast majority of mediums. In a society where women had limited public roles, being a medium gave them agency, authority, and financial independence. They were not just wives and mothers, they were conduits to the divine, revered and sought after. It was a revolutionary shift, giving women a voice that literally came from another world. The very language used by scientists mirrored the era's intellectual currents. Terms like psychic force, etheric body, and telepathic waves were attempts to frame the paranormal within a scientific lexicon, even when the underlying mechanisms remained elusive. This desire to categorize and understand, even if it meant stretching existing scientific paradigms, highlights the era's unique blend of empirical rigor and adventurous speculation. It's like trying to describe a dream using only engineering terms. You can approximate it, but you miss a lot of the magic. The rapid growth of the movement also led to the formation of spiritualist societies, churches, and publications, books and pamphlets detailing spiritualist philosophy, techniques for developing mediumistic abilities, and accounts of successful séances flooded the market. It became a cohesive, organized movement with its own doctrines and practices, moving beyond just individual parlor experiments. People weren't just attending séances, they were joining a community, a new kind of faith. The long-term impact of these scientific investigations, despite their often inconclusive nature, that was profound. While they failed to definitively prove the existence of spirits or psychic powers to the satisfaction of the broader scientific community, they did help to lay some of the groundwork for modern psychological and parapsychological research. They also firmly established the need for controlled conditions and rigorous methodology when investigating extraordinary claims. The battle for scientific legitimacy, however, spiritualism largely lost. You hear a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound. Not like wood, but like paper. You glance around, but the room is still. The other participants lost in their silent concentration. It's a trick of the mind, surely brought on by the story you're witnessing. The early Victorians, though, would have been acutely attuned to every subtle sound, every faint movement, interpreting them through the lens of their desperate hope and burgeoning belief. They were on the cusp of something new, something that promised to lift the heavy veil of mourning and connect them to a reality beyond their own. As the hum of the scientific instruments fades into the quiet of the night, you're left with the image of earnest men and women, meticulously trying to weigh a thought or measure a whisper from beyond. They were, in their own way, as haunted as any grieving Victorian in a dark séance room, haunted by the unknown, driven by curiosity, and ultimately constrained by the very limits of the scientific tools and understanding of their time. The spirit world seems preferred to remain just out of reach, a fleeting shadow that resisted all attempts at capture and quantification. The Fox sisters, though they would later admit to some of their trickery, had, by 1848, unwittingly or perhaps cunningly uncorked a phenomenon that would define an era. The raps in Hydesville were just the opening chord of a symphony of whispers, knocks, and manifestations that would echo through parlors and public halls for decades to come. The stage was set for a world where the living and the dead were believed to be separated by only the thinnest of membranes, ready to communicate at the lightest tap. The Victorians were about to be truly haunted, not just by ghosts, but by the very idea of them. The sterile glow of the scientific laboratory, with its humming instruments and meticulous notebooks, slowly dissipates as you step out into the wider, bustling world of Victorian society. This isn't a world confined to the private parlor or the controlled experiment. It's a world of fervent social change, of simmering discontent, and of passionate calls for reform. And, surprisingly, you're about to discover that the whispers from beyond the veil weren't just about comforting the bereaved or satisfying scientific curiosity. They became an unlikely catalyst, a spiritual megaphone for some of the most radical social movements of the era. The echoes of the Fox sisters' raps still reverberate faintly in your mind as you transition from the humble Hydesville farmhouse into the bustling, gas-lit world of Victorian parlors and public halls. The seed of spiritualism has been sown, and now it's beginning to sprout, blossoming into a vibrant, often theatrical, phenomenon. You're no longer just hearing knocks. You're about to witness the full spectrum of how the living sought to commune with the dead, from the simple to the utterly astounding. This is where the Victorians truly got creative with their cosmic communication. You find yourself not in a séance room, but in a public assembly hall, perhaps a church converted for a lecture, or a bustling convention center. The air vibrates with earnest oratory, the rustle of pamphlets, and the passionate murmurs of people united by a common cause. Here, women stand on platforms, their voices clear and strong, advocating for rights and reforms that would have been unimaginable just a generation earlier. Abolitionists preach against slavery, and temperance advocates warn against the evils of drink. This is the Victorian progressive movement, and interwoven into its very fabric, like a ghostly thread, is spiritualism. And honestly, for a society so obsessed with polite conversation, they sure knew how to throw a good, fiery debate. You find yourself in a different, perhaps slightly grander, parlor. The air is still heavy with anticipation, but now there's an added sense of performance, a theatricality that wasn't quite present in the raw, early days of the Fox sisters. The medium, often a woman of slight build, sits at the head of a table, sometimes with a cabinet nearby a wooden box or curtained enclosure designed to contain the medium, and ostensibly enhance the manifestations. The other sitters, dressed in their Sunday best, place their hands on the table, palms down, fingers lightly touching their neighbors to form an unbroken circle. This hand-holding, this physical chain, was believed to be crucial for channeling and concentrating the psychic energy. It's like setting up a human circuit board, hoping to power up the spiritual Wi-Fi. One of the most common historical facts often cited regarding spiritualism's broader impact is its profound and undeniable connection to the women's rights movement, particularly the fight for suffrage. In an era where women were largely confined to the domestic sphere, denied property rights, limited in education, and forbidden from speaking publicly or voting. Spiritualism offered an unprecedented platform for female empowerment. It was a space where women could assume positions of authority, act as spiritual leaders, and express themselves publicly without the usual societal constraints. The séance itself is the most common historical fact when discussing Victorian spiritualism's practical application. This gathering, derived from the French word for sitting, was the primary vehicle through which communication with the spirit world was attempted. Séances could range from intimate family affairs in private homes to large public demonstrations in rented halls, attracting hundreds of paying customers eager for a glimpse of the beyond. These events were carefully orchestrated, often beginning with prayers, hymns, or solemn declarations to create a reverent atmosphere, and almost always conducted in dim lighting or complete darkness, which mediums claimed was necessary for spirit manifestations to occur. Critics, of course, had other theories about the darkness. Imagine a female medium, a respectable housewife by day, who, during a trance, becomes the voice of a wise spirit or a deceased historical figure. In this trance state, she could deliver powerful speeches, criticize societal injustices, or even offer political commentary, all without being accused of stepping outside her proper sphere. After all, it wasn't her speaking. It was the spirit speaking through her. This clever loophole provided a crucial avenue for women to develop public speaking skills, gain confidence, and exert influence that was otherwise denied to them. It was like a cheat code for social change, allowing women to bypass all the patriarchal firewalls. As the séance progresses, the initial raps you've become familiar with might begin, but then things get more elaborate. You might hear the faint tinkling of a bell, seemingly floating in midair, or the strumming of a small musical instrument playing a ghostly tune with no visible hands. Pencils might write messages unaided, or flowers and small objects might appear from thin air, seemingly materialized by spirits. These were all considered physical manifestations, direct interactions with the material world by the unseen spirits. Many of the prominent early suffragists, like Susan B., Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, had strong personal or professional connections to spiritualism. While not all suffragists were spiritualists, the movement provided a fertile ground for progressive ideas about equality. Spiritualism's core tenet of direct, unmediated communication with the divine, bypassing traditional male-dominated clergy, resonated deeply with feminist ideals. If spirits could speak through women, and those messages contained wisdom, then women must possess inherent spiritual authority. This challenged the very foundation of patriarchal religious and social structures. One of the most dramatic and highly anticipated physical phenomena was table tipping or table turning. You watch as the heavy mahogany table begins to shudder, then lift, first on one side, then another. It might rock violently, or even levitate completely off the floor, sometimes for several seconds. The sitters might gasp, some nervously clutching their hands, others staring in wide-eyed wonder. The table might spell out messages by rapping a leg on the floor, or by tilting towards letters on an alphabet board. Imagine trying to eat dinner at a table that has strong opinions about your political views and expresses them by repeatedly trying to flip your soup bowl. It certainly made for a lively evening. You hear a woman's voice, clear and resonant, speaking not just about votes, but about the inherent equality of souls. She argues that if a spirit, regardless of its earthly gender, can impart divine truth, then earthly women are equally capable of intellectual and moral leadership. It's a powerful argument, drawing its strength from the very phenomena that fascinated the age. The séance room became a training ground for the public platform, a place where female voices, once silenced, found expression. Another astounding phenomenon was materialization, often considered the ultimate proof of spirit presence. In a darkened room, a misty, ethereal form might begin to coalesce, sometimes taking on recognizable features of a deceased loved one. These forms, often described as shimmering or translucent, might briefly touch a sitter, offer a spectral embrace, or even speak in a ghostly whisper. Some mediums claimed to produce full-form materializations, where a complete, solid-looking spirit figure would emerge from the cabinet, walk around the room, and even engage in conversation. Imagine the awe, the terror, the desperate hope of seeing a spectral version of your deceased child or parent standing before you. It was the ultimate reunion, fleeting and fragile, but seemingly real. Then there was ectoplasm. This was perhaps the most grotesque and controversial of the physical manifestations. Mediums would reportedly exude a strange, viscous, often foul-smelling substance from their mouths, noses, ears, or other orifices. This ectoplasm, resembling cheesecloth or gauze in photographs, was supposedly a spiritual substance, the raw material spirits used to materialize. In photographs, it often looked uncannily like swallowed fabric or raw cotton wool, leading to much skepticism. It's like your spiritual connection comes with a side of really unappetizing slime, not exactly the ethereal glow you were hoping for. But what about a truly unique and often little-known detail regarding the conduct of these séances? Many séances, particularly those involving physical phenomena, required a circle of sitters to be formed with hands joined, and no one was allowed to break the circle under any circumstances. Often even if they felt a need to cough, sneeze, or otherwise move. This seemingly innocent rule was often a crucial element of the medium's control and facilitated deception. If a sitter broke the circle, mediums claimed it would break the current and prevent manifestations, or worse, harm the medium. While not universally embraced by all spiritualists, a significant fringe of the movement pushed for concepts that were scandalous to Victorian society. Free love in this context didn't necessarily mean promiscuity, but rather the belief that individuals should be free to form relationships based on spiritual affinity and mutual respect, unconstrained by legal or social conventions like forced marriages or restrictive divorce laws. They argued that if spirits were unbound by earthly strictures, so too should human relationships be based on higher spiritual principles rather than property or social status. Imagine the psychological pressure on a participant. You're in a dark room, gripped by anticipation, perhaps hearing strange noises, and you're told that any movement, any break in the chain, could ruin everything. This simple instruction created an environment where the medium had maximum freedom of movement, both literally and figuratively, without being observed. If the lights were off, and everyone was tightly holding hands, the medium or an accomplice could easily be moving about, producing raps, or manipulating objects without detection. This unspoken constraint on the sitters was a masterstroke of performance control, turning the entire group into unwitting collaborators in the potential deception. It's like a magician telling you not to blink. But the reason isn't magic. It's so you don't see them stuffing the rabbit up their sleeve. Imagine a spiritualist commune where couples might freely associate. Divorce was easily obtained, and children were raised collectively, all based on what spirits supposedly advised. These were utopian experiments, often short-lived and controversial, but they demonstrate how far some adherents were willing to push social boundaries, directly inspired by their spiritual beliefs. It's like a Victorian dating app, but instead of swiping right, you're asking a Ouija board if your souls are compatible, and then maybe skipping the whole marriage certificate part. As the air grows colder in the parlor, a chilling whisper seems to brush past your ear, making you instinctively recoil. A shudder passes through the table, and then a distinct rap comes not from the table, but from underneath it, seemingly from the floor directly below you. It's close. You can almost feel the presence. The Victorians were utterly captivated by these subtle yet profound sensory experiences, interpreting every creak, every chill, every fleeting shadow as definitive proof. This radical edge, particularly the free love aspect, often brought spiritualism into direct conflict with mainstream Victorian morality and became a key target for its critics, reinforcing the image of the movement as dangerous and unconventional. Nevertheless, it illustrates how spiritualism, for some, was not just a religion or a scientific pursuit, but a complete blueprint for a new, more equitable society, divinely revealed. The phenomena were not limited to the physical. Automatic writing was a hugely popular method, where the medium's hand would write messages involuntarily, often without conscious thought or even knowledge of the content, until it was read aloud. Sometimes the writing was in unfamiliar languages, or in the hand of the purported spirit. This offered a more detailed form of communication than simple raps, allowing for longer messages, poems, and even entire books to be dictated by spirits. Imagine your hand suddenly writing out a recipe for Victorian sponge cake from a great-great-grandmother you never met. Handy, but undeniably eerie. And this brings us to a fascinating and still debated point of academic discussion. Historians still debate whether spiritualism's embrace of progressive social reforms like women's rights and abolition was a genuine ideological commitment born from its core tenets of spiritual equality, or primarily a pragmatic strategy to gain adherence by aligning with popular reform movements and offering a countercultural space for those dissatisfied with conventional society. Was spiritualism inherently progressive, or was it simply a convenient vehicle for existing progressive sentiments? Trance speaking, as mentioned earlier, was another powerful form of communication. The medium would enter a deep trance state, and then a different voice would emerge, often adopting the mannerisms, accent, and vocabulary of the communicating spirit. These spirit controls became famous in their own right. Acting as intermediaries or gatekeepers to the spirit world, they would introduce other spirits, offer philosophical discourses, and sometimes deliver surprisingly mundane or even humorous messages. This gave a personality to the spirit world, making the communication feel far more personal and authentic. Some scholars argue that the foundational spiritualist belief in the inherent divinity and equality of all souls, regardless of race or gender, naturally led to a rejection of oppressive social structures. If all souls were equally capable of spiritual progression and communication with the divine, then earthly inequalities like slavery or gender discrimination were morally indefensible. They point to the sincere efforts of many spiritualists who dedicated their lives to these causes. Others contend that spiritualism, by its very nature, attracted rebels, dissenters, and those on the fringes of society who were already inclined towards reform. It provided a ready-made community and a powerful, supernatural justification for ideas that were otherwise controversial. They suggest that the movement opportunistically aligned with these causes to bolster its numbers and cultural relevance, rather than initiating the reform movements themselves. It's like a new band suddenly adopting a popular political cause. Are they truly committed, or just looking for a bigger audience? Perhaps it was a complex blend of both, as is often the case with historical movements. The emotional impact of these séances on the bereaved cannot be overstated. For those ravaged by grief, a momentary glimpse of a loved one's materialized form, a message in their handwriting, or a voice speaking through the medium was a profound, life-altering experience. It offered immense comfort, a sense of closure, and the reassurance that death was not the end. The tears, the sobs, the fervent exclamations of joy at a perceived reunion were all genuine, regardless of the authenticity of the phenomena. For them, it was real enough to soothe their aching hearts. Beyond women's rights, spiritualism also played a significant, though sometimes less acknowledged, role in the abolitionist movement in the United States. Many spiritualists were staunch anti-slavery advocates, believing that the subjugation of any human being was a profound violation of divine law and spiritual equality. Mediums would sometimes channel the spirits of deceased enslaved people, who would deliver powerful messages detailing the horrors of slavery and calling for its immediate end. These spirit messages served to galvanize abolitionist sentiment among believers. Adding a spiritual imperative to the moral and political arguments against slavery, however, where there was demand and desperation, there was also ample opportunity for fraud. This leads us to a fascinating and still debated point of academic discussion. Historians still debate the extent to which spiritualist mediums were conscious. Deliberate fraudsters versus individuals who genuinely believed in their abilities, but under pressure to produce phenomena, resorted to trickery to enhance or help along manifestations. Was it all a grand deception from the very beginning? A calculated exploitation of grief? Or did some mediums start with genuine experiences or self-delusion, and only later, facing scrutiny and the relentless demand for more dramatic phenomena, succumb to the temptation of faking? Imagine a séance where a spirit speaking through a medium describes the anguish of a plantation, or the injustice of forced labor. For believers, this was a direct testimony from the afterlife, an undeniable indictment of the institution of slavery. This spiritual endorsement added a unique, supernatural dimension to the abolitionist cause, providing comfort and conviction to those fighting for freedom. Some scholars argue that the numerous exposures of fraudulent mediums, the similarities in their tricks, and the consistent refusal of many to perform under truly controlled conditions strongly suggest widespread, deliberate deception. They point to the elaborate contraptions, hidden accomplices, and clever sleight of hand employed by many exposed mediums. Others contend that the psychological stress of being a medium, the intense belief of their sitters, and the cultural context of the time could lead to a form of self-deception, where genuine psychological phenomena like automatic writing originating from the medium's subconscious merged with conscious trickery to satisfy the audience's expectations. It's like trying to figure out if your friend is intentionally trying to annoy you, or if they just genuinely have no self-awareness. It's a spectrum, and sometimes it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. The temperance movement, another major Victorian social reform, also found allies within spiritualism. Spirits were often channeled to deliver stern warnings against the dangers of alcohol, detailing how intemperance led to moral decay, family breakdown, and spiritual degradation. For a society grappling with widespread alcohol abuse and its devastating social consequences, the voice of a spirit condemning drink could be a powerful motivator for reform. It was like getting a very stern, very preachy text message from your deceased grandmother about your drinking habits. The Victorian public, for its part, was divided. Many were ardent believers, their faith unwavering despite exposures. Others were staunch skeptics, often led by prominent magicians like Harry Houdini, who dedicated their lives to exposing fraudulent mediums and replicating their tricks. Newspapers eagerly reported on both miraculous séances and sensational exposés, feeding the public's fascination and debate. It was a cultural battleground, waged in dim parlors and brightly lit lecture halls. Furthermore, spiritualism intersected with efforts in educational reform and the establishment of utopian communities. Many spiritualists advocated for broader access to education, believing it was essential for individual and spiritual development. They often established their own schools and publishing houses. The utopian communities, like Modern Times in New York or Harmonial communities, sought to create ideal societies based on spiritualist principles of communal living, equality, and spiritual freedom, often attempting to put into practice some of the radical social ideas, like free love, that emerged from the movement. These were attempts to build heaven on earth, guided by spectral architects. The fascination with physical phenomena led to the development of specific equipment. Spirit trumpets, cone-shaped devices, were often used to amplify spirit voices, or sometimes just to allow the medium to speak from an unexpected location. Spirit slates, small chalkboards, would seemingly receive messages written by unseen hands. Musical boxes would play by themselves. These simple props became powerful tools in the medium's arsenal, creating an illusion of supernatural activity. It was like a very low-tech special effects studio, designed to blow minds with minimal effort. The social impact of spiritualism was truly far-reaching, transforming it from a mere curiosity into a vibrant, sometimes radical force for change. It gave voice to the marginalized, challenged, oppressive norms, and offered a spiritual justification for progressive ideals. While its more extreme social experiments sometimes alienated the mainstream, its broader influence on women's rights and abolitionism is undeniable. As the Victorian era progressed, and spiritualism became more entrenched, its rituals evolved. Séances became more structured, almost like church services, with established protocols and expectations. The spiritual messages themselves often became more sophisticated, moving beyond simple reassurances to philosophical treatises on morality, cosmology, and social reform. Spirits were believed to be guiding humanity towards a higher consciousness, advocating for temperance, abolition, and women's suffrage. It wasn't just about contacting your dead aunt, it was about improving society with divine guidance. You sensed the collective spirit of an era yearning for progress, for a better world. And paradoxically, finding some of the answers in the ethereal realm, the Victorians, with all their rigid social structures, were remarkably open to radical ideas when those ideas came wrapped in the compelling mystery of the spirit world. The boundaries between the physical and the spiritual were not just blurred in seance rooms. They were permeable in the grand halls of social reform. You feel a final, gentle wrap this time on the very table before you. It's quiet, distinct, almost as if saying goodbye. The gaslights outside cast long, dancing shadows through the gaps in the curtains, and for a moment you can almost believe that the veil between worlds is indeed thin, gossamer-like, just waiting for the right conditions to part. The Victorians, with their blend of scientific curiosity and profound emotional need, created an entire industry around that hope, filling their homes with the whispers and raps of the unseen. It was a haunting, exhilarating, and deeply human quest to understand the ultimate mystery. As the echoes of impassioned speeches fade, you're left with a profound understanding of how interconnected, seemingly disparate movements can be. Spiritualism, for all its controversy and inherent paradoxes, undeniably helped push the Victorian world towards a more equitable future. It truly haunted the society, not just with ghosts, but with the spectral whispers of possibility and change. You feel the slight lingering chill of the séance parlor fading, replaced by a subtle shift in the air, a hum that's not from unseen spirits, but from something decidedly more earthly machinery. The Victorian era, as you know, was a period of astonishing technological innovation. From steam engines to telegraphs, from the daguerreotype to the phonograph, new inventions were transforming daily life at a breathtaking pace. And it's precisely this explosion of scientific and mechanical progress that, paradoxically, created fertile ground for the growth and widespread acceptance of spiritualism. The Victorians, in their eagerness to master the physical world, inadvertently opened a conceptual door for the unseen. The impassioned speeches from the public assembly halls, the earnest debates about suffrage and abolition, slowly begin to dim, replaced by a growing murmur of doubt, suspicion, and eventually, a distinct note of ridicule. You feel the collective gaze of society shifting, turning away from the glowing cabinet and the wrapping table, not entirely in anger, but with a weary sigh. This isn't the sudden, dramatic fall of an empire. It's the gradual, almost imperceptible erosion of a phenomenon that once held millions spellbound. You're about to witness the slow, inevitable decline of mainstream Victorian spiritualism, a fading echo in the grand, gaslit parlor of history. You find yourself in a bustling exhibition hall, perhaps the Great Exhibition of 1851 or a smaller, regional display of wonders. The air is thick with the smell of coal, oil, and the faint ozone tang of new electrical currents. Gleaming brass and polished wood reflect the gaslight, and the chatter of amazed onlookers fills the space. Here you see marvels, intricate clocks, calculating machines, powerful looms, and, most importantly for our story, devices that could transmit messages across vast distances or capture fleeting images. This wasn't just about making life easier, it was about bending reality to human will, about pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. And in this atmosphere, the idea of communicating with the dead didn't seem quite so outlandish. You find yourself standing on the edges of this once vibrant movement, watching as its edges fray. The grand public séances that once filled music halls are now less frequent, drawing smaller, more skeptical crowds. The newspapers, which once breathlessly reported on miraculous materializations, now feature exposes and scathing caricatures. The enthusiasm, once so palpable, has begun to wane, replaced by a weary cynicism. And honestly, it's a bit like watching a once viral internet challenge slowly disappear from your feed. Everyone's just moved on to the next big thing, leaving a few diehards to keep the flame alive. One of the most common historical facts that directly ties technology to spiritualism is the invention and rapid popularization of the telegraph. Before the telegraph, communication over long distances was slow, reliant on physical messengers or slow mail. Then, suddenly, messages could travel almost instantaneously across continents, seemingly bypassing physical space entirely. Dots and dashes, a simple code, allowed thoughts and words to leap across vast geographical divides. One of the most common historical facts regarding spiritualism's decline is the cumulative effect of repeated exposures of fraud, coupled with the deaths or public confessions of key mediums. While spiritualism had always faced skepticism, the sheer volume of debunking efforts, particularly by figures like Harry Houdini, remember him, with his invisible phosphorescent powders and clever tricks, eventually took a heavy toll on its public credibility. Each exposed spirit hand, each revealed wire, each confession from a once revered medium chipped away at the foundation of belief. Imagine the profound psychological impact of this. If an electrical current could carry your deepest thoughts from London to New York in mere seconds, why couldn't a different kind of current carry messages from the land of the living to the land of the dead? The telegraph presented a powerful analogy, just as the telegraph lines were invisible conduits for human thought. Perhaps the medium was an invisible conduit for spiritual thought. It offered a scientific framework, however superficial, for the inexplicable. People simply extended their understanding of this new, invisible communication to encompass the spiritual realm. It was the ultimate long-distance call, except instead of Aunt Mildred, it was Aunt Mildred's ghost, and the connection was way more unreliable. Imagine the headlines, "Another Spirit Caught," or "Medium Confesses." The cumulative weight of these revelations was immense. People who had once been fervent believers found their faith tested, and often shattered. The mediums themselves, once celebrated as conduits to the divine, were increasingly seen as con artists, exploiting the grief and gullibility of the masses. The death of prominent founders, like the Fox sisters themselves, also created a void. Margaretta and Kate Fox, the very catalyst of the movement, eventually confessed to fraud later in their lives, though Kate later recanted her confession. This back and forth, the public scandal, dealt a significant blow to the movement's integrity. It was hard to maintain belief in a system when its very founders were saying, "Just kidding, it was all a prank." You lean closer to a demonstration of a telegraph machine. The rhythmic clicking of the sounder, the delicate dance of the paper tape, the swift transmission of seemingly impossible information. It's mesmerizing. For many Victorians, witnessing this marvel wasn't just about practical utility, it was about expanding their very definition of reality. If the human voice could be converted into electrical impulses and then rematerialized at a distant point, then perhaps the very essence of a departed soul could likewise be channeled and made manifest. It transformed the supernatural from pure magic into a kind of spiritual science. Beyond the direct exposures, several other factors contributed to this gradual decline. Internal divisions and schisms within the spiritualist movement itself weakened its unity. Believers argued over what constituted genuine phenomena, how mediums should be controlled, and what the true purpose of spiritualism was. Some preferred the philosophical and moral aspects, while others craved physical manifestations. These disagreements led to fragmentation, with various factions forming and often condemning each other, further eroding public trust. It's hard to present a united front against the forces of skepticism when you're too busy arguing about whether ghosts prefer to communicate via rapping or levitation. Beyond the telegraph, the burgeoning field of electricity itself played a massive, if often misunderstood, role. Electric currents were mysterious, invisible forces that could power lights, make bells ring, and seemingly animate inert objects. Mediums and their supporters often spoke of spiritual currents or magnetic fluids that flowed through the séance room, connecting sitters and powering manifestations. This loose connection to scientific terminology lent an air of legitimacy to their claims. It was like calling your garden gnome a biosculptural horticultural enhancer to make it sound more impressive. Another significant factor was the changing social and psychological landscape. As the immediate trauma of the American Civil War began to recede, and as medical science slowly advanced, the desperate need for direct communication with the dead, while still present, became less acutely overwhelming for the general populace. Furthermore, the rise of modern psychology offered alternative, non-supernatural explanations for phenomena previously attributed to spirits. Concepts like the subconscious mind, hypnotism, suggestibility, and collective delusion provided new frameworks for understanding experiences that mediums once claimed were supernatural. Psychologists argued that automatic writing was a manifestation of a split personality, not a spirit, that trance states were psychological, not divine. It was like suddenly having a very convincing, very scientific explanation for why you keep losing your car keys. It's your absent-mindedness, not mischievous poltergeists. Another crucial technological development was photography, the ability to capture a moment in time, To create an exact, unalterable image of reality was nothing short of miraculous to the Victorians. And soon, photographers began to claim they could capture more than just the living. This leads us to a truly unique and often little-known detail: the rise of spirit photography, where ghostly figures, often appearing as translucent overlays or faint, ethereal faces would emerge in photographs taken of living sitters. You see the shift in public discourse. Discussions around psychic phenomena move from the realm of religious belief and entertainment to the emerging fields of parapsychology and abnormal psychology. The focus transitions from proving the afterlife to understanding the human mind and its capacities for illusion, self-deception, and extraordinary mental states. This intellectual reframing slowly but surely peeled away spiritualism's scientific legitimacy. Imagine sitting for a portrait, hoping for a dignified likeness, only to have the developed plate reveal a blurry, semi-transparent image of your deceased loved one standing beside you. These photographs, often manipulated through double exposure, darkroom trickery, or even simple props, were considered irrefutable proof by many believers. They provided tangible visual evidence of the spirit world, something more concrete than fleeting raps or misty materializations. It was like getting a photobomb from beyond the grave, except it was strangely comforting instead of annoying. Now, for a truly unique and often little-known detail about the long-term survival of spiritualism despite its decline. While its public spectacle faded, spiritualism didn't disappear entirely. It adapted and often went underground, transforming from a sensational public performance into a more intimate, church-based, and philosophy-driven movement, sometimes merging with other esoteric or New Age beliefs. Spirit photographers, such as William Mumler, gained notoriety by producing these eerie images. They would typically take a photograph of a sitter, and upon development, a spirit would appear, usually a deceased relative identified by the sitter. While many were exposed as frauds, using previously taken negatives or cleverly positioned cutouts, the sheer desire to believe was so strong that many victims of these tricks remained convinced. The very nature of photography, with its ability to capture light and shadow, made it seem like the perfect medium for spirits, who were, after all, ethereal beings of light. Imagine stepping away from the grand music halls and into a quiet, unassuming church, perhaps in a residential neighborhood. The séance tables are gone, or they've been replaced by rows of pews. The focus is less on physical manifestations and more on spiritual healing, inspirational messages, and ethical teachings. Spiritualist churches began to emphasize personal development, moral living, and the idea of a continuous spiritual progression beyond death, often incorporating elements of what would later become known as New Thought or positive thinking. The medium, instead of summoning ghostly hands, might now offer comforting messages, spiritual guidance, or even clairvoyant readings focused on personal well-being. It was a strategic pivot from prove it or lose it to come for the comfort, stay for the philosophy. They stopped trying to bring ghosts into the room and started bringing spiritual insights into people's lives. And this brings us to a fascinating and still debated point of academic discussion. Historians still debate the extent to which Victorian technology, particularly the telegraph and photography, genuinely influenced spiritualist belief by providing conceptual models for invisible forces and distant communication, versus merely being exploited by mediums as new tools for elaborate deception. Did these technologies fundamentally alter people's understanding of reality, making the supernatural seem more plausible? Or did they simply provide more sophisticated ways for charlatans to ply their trade? This shift allowed spiritualism to endure, albeit in a less sensationalized form. It catered to a different kind of seeker, not just the grieving or the curious, but those looking for a non-traditional spiritual path, a sense of community, and a philosophy that embraced continuous growth. It shed some of its more easily debunked physical phenomena in favor of more subjective, internal experiences, making it harder for skeptics to outright disprove. It became a quiet, persistent hum in the background, rather than a booming drum solo. Now for a truly unique and often little-known detail about spiritualism's social impact. Beyond just providing a platform, spiritualism fostered entirely new, often radically progressive, social norms within its own communities, including advocating for free love and challenging traditional marriage laws, long before these ideas gained any mainstream acceptance. And this brings us to a fascinating and still debated point of academic discussion. Historians still debate whether the decline of Victorian spiritualism represented a complete rejection of belief in the afterlife and paranormal phenomena, or if it merely signified a transformation of these beliefs into new forms, such as parapsychology, New Thought, or various occult practices, continuing to exert a subtle influence on culture. Did the movement truly die, or did it simply shed its skin and re-emerge in a different guise? Some scholars argue that the metaphors of wires carrying invisible messages and lenses, capturing unseen light, genuinely reshaped the Victorian mind, making spiritual communication feel less like magic and more like an undiscovered natural law. They suggest that the rapid advancement of science primed people to accept even radical new possibilities. Others contend that the opportunistic nature of many mediums, who quickly adopted the latest gadgets to enhance their illusions, points to exploitation rather than genuine influence. They highlight the ease with which these technologies could be manipulated for fraudulent purposes, preying on a public that lacked understanding of how they truly worked. It's like trying to figure out if your smart home devices are making your life genuinely easier, or if they're just giving you new ways to accidentally order 20 pounds of cat food. It's probably a bit of both. Some scholars argue that the dramatic drop in public interest and the widespread discrediting of mediums unequivocally mark the end of spiritualism as a dominant cultural force. They contend that the public, disillusioned by fraud, largely moved on, and that the spiritual hunger that fueled it found expression in other, more conventional religious revivals, or in the growing secularism of the early 20th century. The belief in direct spirit communication faded from mainstream acceptability. Others argue that the core impulse behind spiritualism, the desire for evidence of an afterlife, for spiritual meaning beyond organized religion, and for personal spiritual development, never truly went away. They point to the rise of parapsychology, the New Age movement, and the enduring popularity of various forms of mediumship and psychic readings in the 20th and 21st centuries as evidence that spiritualism simply metamorphosed. The original Victorian form may have declined, but its DNA persisted, influencing countless other movements focused on the mind, consciousness, and the unseen. It's like saying the dinosaur is gone, but conveniently forgetting that birds are still flying around. You examine one of these spirit photographs in your hand. The edges are a bit blurry, the image slightly faded, but there it is, a solemn-faced woman, and behind her, a faint, almost translucent figure, a man with a familiar beard. The effect is uncanny, even if you know the tricks behind it. For the Victorian viewer, however, it could be a profoundly emotional and convincing experience. It offered a tangible, reproducible piece of proof in a way that no rapping or table tipping ever could. The legacy of Victorian spiritualism, even in its decline, is surprisingly enduring. It undeniably contributed to the development of parapsychology as a field of study, however controversial. The SPR, born from the spiritualist craze, continued its scientific investigations, influencing later researchers who sought to study ESP, telekinesis, and precognition using rigorous, albeit often frustrating, methods. It established the idea that these phenomena, if real light, could and should be studied scientifically, rather than just dismissed as superstition. The phonograph, invented later in the century, also played a fascinating, albeit minor, role in the intersection of technology and spiritualism. While not as widespread in its application, some mediums and inventors experimented with recording spirit voices. Imagine the eerie, crackling sound of an early wax cylinder phonograph playing back a voice that was supposedly from beyond the grave. These attempts, though often producing only static or the medium's own disguised voice, represented another frontier in the technological quest for spiritual contact. If a machine could capture the human voice and play it back, why couldn't it capture a spirit's voice? It also left an indelible mark on popular culture. The image of the séance, the veiled medium, the rapping table, and the ghostly apparition became iconic tropes in literature, theater, and later film. From Gothic novels to early horror movies, the imagery and concepts of Victorian spiritualism continued to haunt the popular imagination, long after most people stopped believing in actual materializations. It shaped our collective understanding of ghosts and the afterlife in secular ways, even if we no longer attended weekly séances. The constant advancement of technology meant that as soon as one trick was exposed, mediums could simply adapt to a new invention, using it to create fresh illusions. The very speed of innovation meant that the average person struggled to keep up with how these new devices truly worked, making them susceptible to claims of supernatural manipulation. It was a constant game of cat and mouse between technological progress, spiritual belief, and outright fraud. And, of course, its most profound and arguably lasting impact was on gender roles and the early women's rights movement. As we discussed, spiritualism provided an unparalleled platform for women to speak, organize, and lead in a public sphere that was otherwise largely closed to them. Even as the movement declined, the skills, confidence, and networks forged by female spiritualists continued to fuel the suffrage and broader feminist movements. The spiritual authority they claimed during séances subtly, but effectively challenged patriarchal norms, paving the way for future generations of female activists. You hear a faint, almost imperceptible hum, like a distant dynamo vibrating through the floorboards. It's the energy of innovation, the relentless drive to push boundaries, that paradoxically created the perfect environment for the ethereal to take root. The Victorians were constantly wrestling with the implications of their own inventions if science could reveal so much. What else was out there, just beyond their grasp? You see the twilight falling on this extraordinary chapter of history. The grand, audacious claims of physical manifestations give way to quieter, more contemplative forms of spiritual inquiry. The public fascination diminishes, but the underlying questions about life beyond death, about the nature of consciousness, about unseen forces remain. The Victorians, once so captivated, slowly moved on, their attentions drawn to new scientific marvels, new social challenges, and new forms of entertainment. The very concept of a spiritual current or vibration became common parlance in spiritualist circles. Mirroring the scientific language of electricity and electromagnetism, mediums would speak of beings charged with psychic energy or needing a certain polarity to connect with the spirit world. This fusion of scientific-sounding terminology with spiritual claims gave spiritualism an air of modernity and intellectual respectability. Even if the science was entirely fabricated, it allowed believers to reconcile their faith in the unseen with their burgeoning faith in scientific progress. But the echoes linger. The very idea that communication with the deceased is possible, that the mind holds hidden powers, and that there's more to reality than meets the eye. These concepts, once central to Victorian spiritualism, continue to resonate in contemporary culture, albeit in different guises. The spiritual thirst of humanity, it seems, is a well that never truly runs dry. And so, the ghosts of the Victorians, though less overtly manifest, continue to whisper through the annals of time. The rapid spread of information through newspapers and mass-produced pamphlets, facilitated by new printing technologies, also played a crucial role. Accounts of miraculous séances, compelling spirit photographs, and the latest mediumistic phenomena could reach a wide audience quickly, fueling public interest and debate. It was the original viral content, spreading faster than a bad case of Victorian influenza. The last faint rapping fades into silence. The ghostly mists recede from the stage, and the earnest debates about the authenticity of spirit communications quiet down. You find yourself back in the relative calm of the present, but the air still carries a faint, residual chill, a lingering sense of mystery. The grand spectacle of Victorian spiritualism may have dimmed, its public appeal waned, and its most dramatic phenomena largely discredited. But its echoes, subtle and profound, continue to reverberate through our modern world, shaping our understanding of the unseen, the unknown, and even ourselves. The Victorian mind, so accustomed to seeing the impossible become possible through invention, was uniquely predisposed to accept the claims of spiritualism. If a train could travel at previously unimaginable speeds, if light could capture a moment in time, if words could fly through wires, then why couldn't the departed whisper from beyond the grave technology, far from dispelling the mysterious, seem to legitimize it, providing the very vocabulary and conceptual framework for understanding the invisible world? You glance around, and while the gaslights are gone, replaced by the soft glow of your screen, the questions remain. How could a movement so rife with fraud and so often ridiculed capture the minds and hearts of millions for decades? What enduring legacy did it leave behind? Beyond sensational headlines and debunked parlor tricks? This isn't just a historical footnote. It's a foundational thread woven into the fabric of our contemporary fascination with the paranormal, our approach to grief, and even the very language we use to discuss the inner workings of the mind. As the hum of unseen machinery grows fainter, replaced once more by the gentle rustle of curtains and the soft ticking of a clock, you recognize the strange alchemy that occurred in the Victorian era. Their relentless pursuit of scientific advancement inadvertently created a golden age for the supernatural. The machines designed to master the material world instead became the unlikely enablers of belief in the immaterial, leaving a lasting imprint on the era's psyche. The Victorians truly were haunted, not just by grief, but by the very ghost of progress itself. One of the most common historical facts that demonstrate spiritualism's enduring legacy is the continued existence of spiritualism as a recognized religion in many parts of the world, complete with churches, ordained ministers, and formal doctrines. While no longer a mass cultural phenomenon in the Western world, the Spiritualist National Union in the UK, the National Spiritualist Association of Churches in the US, and various other organizations worldwide carry on the traditions established in the Victorian era. These are not secret societies or fringe groups hiding in the shadows. They are functioning religious bodies with regular services, healing circles, and mediumship demonstrations, often emphasizing personal spiritual growth, ethical living, and the continuity of life beyond physical death. The faint hum of Victorian machinery, which paradoxically legitimized the unseen, begins to fade as you step into a different kind of Victorian space, one of privilege, intellect, and often profound influence. Spiritualism wasn't just for the grieving common folk or the curious masses, it permeated every level of society, drawing in some of the most brilliant, powerful, and famous minds of the era. You're about to witness how the allure of the spirit world captivated figures who, by all accounts, should have been the most rational and skeptical. Imagine walking into a spiritualist church today. You might find hymns, prayers, and sermons, much like a traditional church. But then there might be a demonstration of mediumship, where a medium stands before the congregation and attempts to deliver messages from spirit loved ones to members of the audience. The focus is often on bringing comfort, reassurance, and evidence of survival. It's like a quiet, enduring stream that flows from that roaring Victorian river, carrying forward the core belief that love and indeed consciousness never truly dies. They've gone from trying to prove it to the world to simply living it within their communities, which, if you think about it, is a pretty good strategy for longevity. You find yourself in a grand drawing room, perhaps in a stately London townhouse or a comfortable American mansion. The furnishings are opulent heavy drapes, ornate fireplaces, walls adorned with classical paintings and overflowing bookshelves. Here, the gaslight casts a soft, warm glow, illuminating not just the usual participants, but faces you might recognize from history books. These aren't just believers, they are thinkers, writers, scientists, and even royalty. The air isn't thick with desperate grief, but with intellectual curiosity, scientific inquiry, and a deep-seated desire for answers that conventional science and religion couldn't yet provide. It's like being at a very exclusive, very spooky dinner party, where everyone is secretly hoping their dead butler will pop in for dessert. The language of spiritualism, too, has permeated everyday speech. Think about phrases like good vibes, energy, aura, or even the idea of a spirit guide. Many of these concepts, now widely used in New Age circles and even pop culture, have roots that can be traced back to the spiritualist movement. It popularized the idea that individuals could tap into unseen forces, receive guidance from higher realms, and experience a direct, personal spirituality unmediated by traditional institutions. One of the most common historical facts often cited is the involvement of prominent scientists and intellectuals in the spiritualist movement. Far from being dismissed as mere superstition by the educated elite, spiritualism attracted serious attention from individuals who had built their reputations on logic, observation, and empirical evidence. They didn't just believe, they investigated, they formed committees, conducted experiments, and wrote lengthy treatises attempting to reconcile these extraordinary phenomena with scientific principles. It was a genuine attempt to expand the boundaries of science itself, to prove the existence of the immaterial using material methods. Beyond its formal religious continuation, a truly unique and often little-known detail about spiritualism's lasting influence lies in its subtle yet significant contribution to the early development and public acceptance of psychoanalysis and the concept of the unconscious mind. While Freud himself was no spiritualist, and in fact, often dismissed mediumship as delusion or neurosis, the Victorian fascination with altered states of consciousness, trance, automatic writing, and the idea of hidden unseen forces influencing behavior created a cultural readiness for his theories. Imagine a world where the lines between physics, philosophy, and the paranormal were not so rigidly drawn. To a Victorian scientist, if a phenomenon occurred repeatedly, even if its cause was unknown, it warranted investigation. If table tipping happened, then it happened, and the next logical step was to figure out why. This open-mindedness, combined with the era's boundless optimism about scientific discovery, meant that many leading thinkers genuinely believed that spiritualism represented a new frontier of knowledge. Akin to the discovery of electromagnetism or microbiology, imagine a world already wrestling with the idea that hands could write messages without conscious control, or that voices could speak through individuals in a trance. These were the phenomena spiritualism presented, however fraudulently. When Freud introduced the concept of the unconscious mind, a vast reservoir of thoughts, desires, and memories operating outside conscious awareness, influencing our dreams, slips of the tongue, and even neuroses, it wasn't a completely alien concept to a public that had been grappling with the idea of hidden internal voices and forces for decades. Spiritualism, in its own peculiar way, prepared the ground for the radical notion that there were vast, invisible landscapes within the human psyche. It was like a warm-up act for the main show, but the warm-up act involved more table tipping and less therapeutic couch time. The idea that something unseen could control our actions or express itself without our direct will was already in the air. Thanks in part to the Victorian obsession with the spirit world, perhaps the most famous scientific advocate was Alfred Russel Wallace, 1823 and 1913, the co-discoverer of the theory of evolution by natural selection alongside Charles Darwin. Wallace was a brilliant naturalist, explorer, and meticulous observer, yet he became a staunch and lifelong defender of spiritualism. He attended countless séances, investigated various mediums, and published extensively on the subject, much to the chagrin of many of his scientific peers. For Wallace, the phenomena of spiritualism, the raps, levitations, and materializations were as real and as deserving of scientific study as any biological specimen. He believed they pointed to a realm of existence beyond the purely physical, a dimension of consciousness that science had yet to comprehend. He felt that the scientific method should be applied to all observable phenomena, not just those that fit neatly into existing paradigms. He even argued that natural selection couldn't fully explain the human mind, leaving room for a spiritual component. It's like a world-renowned chef meticulously documenting a recipe for invisible cookies. You trust his expertise, even if the ingredients are a bit airy, and this brings us to a fascinating and still debated point of academic discussion. Historians still debate whether the popularization of spiritualist phenomena, despite being largely debunked, inadvertently fostered a widespread cultural openness to concepts of the subconscious and psychological depths that ultimately benefited the reception of early psychoanalytic theories. Or if it merely highlighted a pervasive human susceptibility to self-deception and delusion that psychoanalysis later sought to address. Did spiritualism accidentally pave the way for psychology? Or did it just provide more patience for it? You might also encounter William Crookes' 1832-1919, a distinguished British chemist and physicist credited with discovering the element thallium and inventing the radiometer and the Crookes tube, a precursor to the X-ray tube. Crookes was initially skeptical of spiritualism, but after conducting extensive, supposedly rigorous experiments with famous mediums like Daniel Douglas Home and Florence Cook, he became convinced of the authenticity of their phenomena. He published his findings in prestigious scientific journals, causing uproar and damaging his scientific reputation. He claimed to have witnessed home levitate, and to have seen Florence Cook materialize a full-form spirit called Katie King. For Crooks, these were not parlor tricks, but observable facts, albeit ones that defied conventional physics. His detailed accounts, though controversial, lent enormous credibility to the spiritualist movement among many educated Victorians. Some argue that by constantly pushing the boundaries of what was considered conscious and rational, spiritualism inadvertently expanded the public's conceptual framework for understanding the human mind. They exposed people to the idea that there were parts of the self, or influences on the self, that operated beyond waking awareness. Others contend that spiritualism's widespread fraud simply underscored the ease with which human perception can be fooled, and how desperate people are for answers. A phenomenon that early psychology then sought to systematically analyze and explain. It's a chicken and egg question: did the belief in ghosts make us ready for the unconscious? Or did the unconscious simply make us more prone to believing in ghosts? The artistic and literary world was equally captivated. You see a familiar, distinguished figure in the corner, perhaps sketching intently. This could be Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, 1859–1930, the creator of the hyper-rational detective Sherlock Holmes, who, ironically, became one of spiritualism's most fervent and influential advocates. Despite creating a character synonymous with logic and deduction, Doyle became deeply committed to spiritualism after losing many loved ones, including his son, brother, and 2 nephews in World War I. He spent the latter part of his life lecturing and writing extensively about the subject, often facing ridicule. For Doyle, spiritualism was not merely a comfort, it was a profound truth, the logical extension of scientific understanding, proving the continuity of life. He believed so strongly that he was willing to sacrifice his considerable reputation for it, much like Holmes would pursue a baffling case no matter the cost. Except this case involved ghosts instead of jewels. The echoes of Victorian spiritualism are also profoundly visible in our popular culture's enduring fascination with ghosts, the paranormal, and the supernatural. Every ghost story, every horror movie featuring a séance, every TV show about paranormal investigators, they all owe a debt to the Victorian era. The image of the medium, the dark parlor, the eerie rapping, the materializing spirit, these tropes were solidified during spiritualism's heyday. We consume these narratives for entertainment, for a thrill, for a glimpse into the unknown, without necessarily believing them. But the desire to believe, the lingering question of what if, is a direct inheritance from the Victorians, who genuinely grappled with these questions in their daily lives. We are still, in a way, haunted by their ghosts, projected onto our screens and into our imaginations. Another prominent literary figure drawn to spiritualism was Victor Hugo, 1802–1885. The celebrated French novelist and poet, think Les Miserables. During his exile on the island of Jersey, Hugo and his family engaged in extensive table-turning séances, claiming to communicate with spirits of historical figures like Shakespeare, Galileo, and even Jesus Christ. His daughter, Leopoldine, who had tragically drowned, was often believed to be a primary communicator. While Hugo's involvement was less about scientific proof and more about poetic and philosophical exploration, his immense cultural stature lent an artistic weight to the movement, suggesting that even the greatest creative minds found truth and inspiration in the spirit world. Consider how we process grief today. While modern society relies on therapy, support groups, and scientific understanding of the grieving process, the underlying human desire for connection with the deceased remains potent. Spiritualism offered a direct, if illusory, answer to that primal yearning. Its legacy subtly informs the continued appeal of psychic mediums and grief counselors who offer a sense of connection, even if the methods are different. The Victorian need to know their loved ones were okay, that death wasn't truly an end, is a universal human experience that transcends time and societal shifts. Now, for a truly unique and often little-known detail about the involvement of these prominent figures. Many highly respected Victorian scientists and intellectuals who investigated spiritualism developed elaborate, often Rube Goldberg-esque devices and protocols specifically designed to prevent fraud during séances, yet still claim to witness genuine phenomena. They weren't just passively observing. They were actively trying to scientifically trap the spirits or mediums in their trickery. Furthermore, spiritualism's decline also highlighted the importance of critical thinking and scientific skepticism. The very process of debunking, of exposing fraud, became a vital part of scientific methodology and public education. Figures like Houdini, while entertaining, also instilled in the public a healthy distrust of extraordinary claims presented without verifiable evidence. This era inadvertently sharpened the tools of rational inquiry, providing a template for how to approach claims of the paranormal with a critical eye. It taught us that sometimes the most astonishing trick is how easily we can fool ourselves. Imagine crooks building a circuit that would ring a bell if the medium moved their hand from a pressure plate, or devising scales that would register the weight of materialized spirits. Or imagine Sir William Barrett, a physicist and founding member of the Society for Psychical Research, designing a psychic thermometer to measure temperature drops around supposed spirits. The fact that these intelligent, often brilliant men, after applying what they considered rigorous controls, still reported phenomena that defied explanation is a fascinating aspect of the era. It suggests either an unparalleled level of mediumistic cunning, a profound capacity for self-delusion even among the sharpest minds, or that something genuinely inexplicable was indeed happening. It's like designing a super complicated mousetrap that plays a symphony when it catches a mouse, only to find the mouse is still there, composing a concerto, and the trap is playing itself. You can almost feel the threads of time connecting that gaslit parlor to your brightly lit room. The Victorians, in their earnest, sometimes naive pursuit of the spirit world, left us with more than just a historical curiosity. They left us with a legacy of inquiry into the nature of consciousness, a cultural vocabulary for the unseen, and a deep, abiding fascination with the mysteries that lie just beyond our comprehension. Their collective journey into the spectral realm informs our own explorations, our own questions about what lies beyond. And this brings us to a fascinating and still debated point of academic discussion. Historians still debate whether the intellectual and scientific elite's embrace of spiritualism was primarily a testament to the powerful psychological comfort and perceived evidence offered by the movement, or a symptom of the limitations of scientific method in an era grappling with phenomena outside established paradigms, alongside a pervasive cultural need for spiritual reassurance. Was it simply clever con-artistry that fooled even the cleverest? Or did it expose the blind spots of burgeoning science when confronted with deeply held beliefs and emotional vulnerability? The final gaslight sputters and dims, leaving you in a gentle, ambient quiet. The murmuring voices of the past, the raps on the table, the whispers from beyond, all soften, dissolving into the gentle hum of your own space. The images of dark parlors and spectral forms begin to fade, replaced by the comforting shadows of your room. Some scholars argue that even the most intelligent individuals can be susceptible to confirmation bias, wishful thinking, and the sophisticated deceptions of skilled mediums, especially when dealing with such emotionally charged subjects as communicating with the dead. They point to the later confessions of fraud by some mediums, whom these scientists had championed. Others suggest that the very novelty of the phenomena, coupled with the incomplete understanding of psychology and the limitations of experimental design at the time, made it genuinely difficult for even astute observers to distinguish trickery from genuine paranormal occurrences. It's like trying to debug a complex computer program when you don't even have a full understanding of how electricity works yet. It's a bit of both a lack of tools and a profound desire to make the program run. You are here. Now, in your own bed, safe and sound. The anxieties of the Victorian age, their desperate need for solace from unimaginable loss, their longing to bridge the ultimate divide. These are their stories, their shadows, gently receding into the annals of time. The spirits they sought, whether real or imagined, have long since returned to their own quiet realms. And now, so too can you. Let the worries of the day, the lingering thoughts of history's mysteries, drift away like wisps of smoke in the evening air. Your journey through the haunting past is complete. Your mind can now settle, your breath can deepen, and your body can ease into rest. The involvement of royalty also speaks to spiritualism's far-reaching appeal. Though often more discreet, figures like Queen Victoria herself was reportedly intrigued by spiritualism, particularly after the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert, in 1861. She was known to consult with mediums, most famously with John Brown, not the famous one, a Scottish gillie gamekeeper who allegedly communicated with Albert's spirit. While her involvement was often veiled in secrecy, it highlights the desperate human need for connection across the divide, regardless of one's station in life. If even the most powerful woman in the world sought solace in the spirit realm, it underscored its universal appeal. It's like finding out the Queen secretly binge watches ghost hunting shows on Netflix.